Hey everyone, welcome to another live stream. Today I want to talk about something that's a little bit, it's very close to my heart. It's really the reason why I went into the whole health sphere. But it's a little bit controversial. So I just want to make sure, just want to give that disclaimer before I start going into here. If talking about the intersection of politics and food isn't your thing, maybe don't watch this one. There's plenty of other videos on this channel. But what I want to talk about is something that occurred to me many years ago. And what happened was I sort of came up against this wall because I knew it was very obvious at that point in time what the right thing to do for me personally, what the right thing to do for my organization that I was part of, what the right thing to do even in the country that I was living in, South Africa. These were all extremely clear, and it was exactly what I'd been saying for years and years since the financial crisis of 2007, 2008. But no one could do it. No individual, including myself, could really do what we were meant to do. And I began to understand that actually, when you take things apart, we're all controlled by systems. Okay. So, in other words, humans, we have this impression of free will. There's not really much space for that free will to happen. Most of us don't exercise free will at all. Most of us are just trapped in a certain system. Okay. And the system that most of us are trapped in, we can call it Babylon. I call it the colonial system. But you can call it whatever you want. You can call it capitalism. You can call it whatever you want. I don't really care what you call it, but it is a global system, and we can talk about the political roots of it at some other day. But what I want you to understand is that there could be another world wherein which humans, we had designed systems for ourselves that were all about maximizing human potential. We're all about maximizing art. We're all about maximizing peace and so on. One could imagine such a system. In fact, I would argue that such systems have been designed in the past, imperfectly, no doubt, but at least that was the attempt, right? The current system that we have has its roots 550 years ago in a colonial system. In fact, I would argue even before that, but I trace colonialism back to the Crusader kingdoms of the 12th century. But you don't have to, right? Wherever it starts from, you have to understand that the system as a whole is designed to maximize profit for the few. In fact, it's not, I think when we talk about capitalism, we sometimes use the starting point of sort of small businesses and so on. That's not really what it's all about. It's it's about it's about the super rich. It's about the richest in society making decisions about how the society is going to be structured. And in South Africa, we have great examples here. You can go and read someone called Cecil John Rhodes, who, was really concerned about a labor crisis and how to get people to work for him. And that's just one example of that, right? There are many, many examples throughout history. So the system within which we are currently all working is designed to extract profit for the very few, right? For those at the top. Once you understand that, then you understand, okay, in order to do that, it needs workers, it needs people in a certain place. And once you understand that, you understand, well, people don't want to be cogs in a machine. People, and we all feel that human life is intrinsically valuable. There's a value to human life, whether or not they are producing profit for someone else, right? Now, the problem is, if once that is true, I think that is just a fundamental part of human nature that we all see as true. And once you understand that, then you understand that there's a problem. The problem is that if you are concerned with structuring a society whereby profit has to be extracted to those at the very top, and you understand that that is against fundamental, what I would argue is fundamental ethical principles or fundamental human nature, however you want to see it, then you have a problem. So how do you do that? How do you keep the masses in line, as it were? Now, there's lots written about this. I mean, if you haven't read Chomsky and Herman's Manufacturing Consent, I think that's a must read before you can even have this conversation. But what became clear to me, I read Chomsky and Herman back in the 1990s, or maybe the 1980s, in fact. But so much later, 20 years after all that, or even longer, what was becoming clear to me was actually these things that we didn't have clear explanations for, like why most people seem to be addicted to something. They do have explanations when we look at it from this perspective. So just thinking in terms of an addict needs money. They need some. They have a huge incentive to find a way to get their drug of choice, right? And then we have a problem that so in other words, addiction is a very, very powerful tool of social control. If someone is addicted to something, if you show me someone who's addicted to whatever it is, cigarettes, alcohol, hard drugs, opium, whatever it is, you're giving me a way to leverage to make them do whatever I want, basically, because they'll do whatever I want if I can provide that fix, right? Now, put that in the context of our discussions around health and so on. People get addicted to all kinds of things. People get addicted to behaviors, but one addiction that I see everywhere is food addiction, is carb addiction, right? So, what is the social role of carbohydrate addiction in our society? It's a question that I don't think we have good answers to, but I think there is a social role that carb addiction is playing. And I think it's something we need to look into. So, again, what do I mean by that? I mean, like, even me just now. So, there's food in the house. We haven't been super strict or whatever. It's a weekend. Sometimes I have a bit of, almond cake or whatever it is on the weekend. Not super strict in that way anymore. And what happens when you have a little bit of almond cake in the morning, you start jonesing for carbohydrates in the afternoon and in the evening, right? So once you that pull, like it's like I'm not going to be constructive. I'm not going to do anything else. Um, I'm not going to do my music. I'm not going to do more productive things because I'm just jonesing. I'm just feeling like I need that carbohydrate hit, right? And if I keep going for the hit, carbohydrates and other drugs, it's like the more you get, the more you want, right? The more you take of a drug, the more your dopamine centers light up in the brain. The more your body remembers that as something that it wants to repeat the next day or even the next hour, right? So the more you have of the drug, it's this never-ending cycle. And the result is you're never gonna you always have all that stuff costs money, so you have to find a way. It doesn't cost much money, but it costs a bit of money, so you always have to find a way to keep some money coming in. You always have to have a job or whatever it may be. But number two is like you're never going to be as productive as you would like to be in the things that you would like to do, and you're also never going to stand up. You're never going to organize a union. You're never going to organize against the people who just want to keep you working for their benefit, right? So again, apologies if this is a bit deep, and some of you will see this as beyond the pale. But like this is really the reason that I got into this. It's the fact that um, we are all operating with little blinders on and little structures. We're all little rats running in a maze, and there's little treats. You have to give the rats cheese, and the little treats, it could be as simple as an ice cream. It could be whatever. It could be porn. It could be like there's lots of things that are. It could be drugs. Could be cigarettes. Could be alcohol. Could be marijuana. Could be whatever the drug of choice is, right? And the drug of choice will depend on the nature of trauma that we're trying to avoid or suppress or whatever it is, right? So all that's a deeper discussion around addiction that we'll also have another day. But for today, I just want to sort of explain my starting point, which is that given that we're all, if from a point of view of compassion, if you're operating with blinders on and if you're just focusing on what you need to get the next hit, that is a very, very, very narrow expression of human nature, a very limited expression of human nature. Make sense? So in that context, what do we want to do? We want to we're going to help people to take the blinders off. If I can help you to take your blinders off and you can see, hey, there's so much more I could be doing. There's so much more joy. There's so much more love. There's so much more creative expression that we can be part of once we're not so focused on the damn donut or the ice cream or whatever it may be, right? Once we do that and we say, look, I don't need to distract myself. I don't need to self-soothe because I'm whole. I'm perfect the way I am. Once you're able to understand those things, that also gives you power. It also gives you the power to organize, for your rights. For people, the people who are maybe paying you less than you should be paid because they're extracting profit out of you, right? It gives you the power to organize in that way. So once you sort of say, okay, I as as an individual am whole and complete, and I don't need these things. We as a community, we are whole and complete, and we don't need those things. Then suddenly everything becomes possible. Now the problem is there's also a biological aspect of this, right? As I was mentioning, the dopamine hits in the brain and so on and so forth. So I help people to understand that there are ways to dial back, to choose your addictions. I sometimes talk about trading addictions. I myself traded a carbohydrate addiction for a coffee addiction at a certain point in my journey. And I think that's part of the journey, right? I think there's nothing wrong with that. But anyway, these are some initial thoughts to give you an idea of where I started in my journey, really, what sort of led me to this point, which is that if we don't take away the cheese, if we don't take away these sort of very narrow blinders that force us into these narrow questions about how can we make enough money to afford the next dopamine hit, you're never going to be able to progress. You're never going to be able to self-actualize. You're never going to be able to become the best version of you that's possible, right? So some food for thought. We do have a cohort starting next week. There's still 1 or 2 slots open. If people want to join, drop me a DM. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks, and I'll see you in the next one.